I don't even remember the judge's name, but I was in front of a woman judge who was, I'll say, at least defense leaning or defense open to
Hmm.
arguments. And I
Yeah.
remember I litigated maybe one or two motions to suppress and won in one very quick trial. And it wasn't even 12:30 by that time. And she looked at me and said, "We're done for the day."
Wouldn't you love a backstage pass to candid discussions at the crossroads of motherhood, justice, community, entrepreneurship, mentoring, and success? Host Melissa Rosenblum is one of only a few women certified by the Supreme Court of New Jersey as a criminal trial attorney. When you add kids, a booming law business, and a little black book full of subject matter experts, you've got the Mighty Merp podcast. That's mightymerp.com.
Welcome to the Mighty Merp podcast. This is your host, Melissa Rosenblum, and I'm excited to be talking to a longtime friend, Alan Tauber, who is an attorney with over 30 years experience handling criminal cases in both state and federal court. He's been an appellate attorney, a civil rights attorney, and also been a public defender with me 100 years ago. That's what I like to say now, Alan. We've been
Yeah.
attorneys for 100 years. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here. I look forward to talking to you, and this is exciting.
I am really excited to talk to you in detail about the Innocence Files, which was on Neflix, about a client that you represented. And I'm sure people want to talk to you about this all the time. But before we get to the Innocence Files and about your client, Chester Hollman? Holman.
Yeah, Holman. Yeah, Chester Hollman.
Before we jump into that, let's do the origin story. What's your origin story, Alan?
I went to Rutgers University Law School. I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, studied English, went to Rutgers University Law School. Worked in a number of firms doing a variety of things, defending corporations, government contracts. Despaired of life as an attorney until I saw an ad. Saw an ad for a job at the Philadelphia Public Defender's Office, which seemed like both an exciting and valuable potentially valuable use of my time. Went there, and it was a major crossroads in my career. So I probably wouldn't be a lawyer now had I not gone to work at the Defender, and had day in day out experience of working on rescuing people from incredibly onerous criminal laws and onerous sentencing laws, and decades in jail. And it was exceedingly gratifying work, both in terms of the sense of a little sense of rescue on the one hand, and also a sense of challenging and indifferent government, an excessively punitive government. And it's been the source of great motivation and satisfaction, throughout my professional career. And that's sort of how I got into it, and found day-to-day inspiration. And if you have that, as hard as this work is, and as exhausting and enervating as it can be, it is gratifying professional work.
So when you finished law school, were you in a corporate law setting or in
Yes.
So you made really good money when you started out as a lawyer.
Correct. I continued over the first sort of 5 to 8 years of my career. Every position I took I seemed to be making less, which my mother, often commented on with great curiosity and distress.
But you didn't like any of the corporate kind of big law firm type lawyering jobs you had?
No, I found that to be really, I mean, I'm not saying it's not valuable work. I'm not saying you can't have a great career there, but, for me, it was very dispiriting.
When you went to college, did you know you wanted to be a lawyer? How old were you when you decided I wanted to go to law school? I want to be a lawyer.
I did not come up with a burning desire to be a lawyer. I did come up with a desire to do, to try to do some kind of public service, to feel like I was doing some public good in a more general sort of way. But I can't say I saw myself as a lawyer. And as I was getting ready to graduate from college, I figured law school was an obvious option from what I had studied, and and as I got into law school and I started becoming a little more focused, I started to think about this criminal defense is something that would be gratifying, though I did very little to position myself for that kind of a job, and it was tough to get after several years in doing representing companies and things. It was not easy. It was not easy to convince a public defender that I was a suitable candidate, but they needed people, and I got hired sort of outside of the normal course of things. It was a good moment, and
Did you get hired in a spring class versus a fall class?
Yeah, it was a spring class. Yeah, the normal. Yeah, the normal course would be a large class of lawyers getting hired together, and I think they had like an unusually high attrition that year and needed to plug some people in. They wanted people who were who already barred and could go straight to court and that sort of thing.
Listen, the Philly Public Defender's Office, which you know since you ran it, is one of the best in the country. And I went in on a spring class, and there were 8 of us. 2 of the 8 are common plea court judges, and one of them is going to be a federal judge, knock on wood, so. Yeah,
it's a great training ground. It's a great training ground for all things, and not just being a judge or a great, lawyer, courtroom lawyer. It's a good training ground for, learning like how to treat people, how to deal with crisis, how to deal with how to communicate with people with a sense of kindness. There was a great mentor who worked there, and he must have been there 40 years. You knew him, Stu Schumann, and he used to say that one of the only things I remember from the training was that he said, the job will make you a better brother, a better sister, husband, father, person in every way.
A better human. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
Completely agree with that. I 100% agree with that.
Yeah, I think, working there was so much pressure and volume, and also it's always my memory that I felt like I was getting yelled at by lots of different people, judges, court reporters, prosecutors, sometimes my own clients, who in the end said thank you, but during the time it was like, so intense. But it has taught me to deal with those pressure situations pretty calmly, and not react in a way of like yelling back or melting down or unable to perform.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because you are the you're the fly in the ointment in a system that is designed to shuffle people through a process that at best is indifferent. Everyone is there to just easily and quickly and just move people along from being charged to being tried to being incarcerated or wherever they're going. And your job, as a public defender, as a criminal defense lawyer, is to put up the stop sign. And you become an annoyance to everybody because of that, because you are gumming up the works and you're making people's lives hard. And of course, you're doing it because the system as a whole and the people individually are trying to, take away, other than life itself, the next most precious commodity, which is a person's liberty. And so yeah, you have to if you don't have the fortitude, you better develop it. You're going to end up finding another thing to do, because you are getting screamed at by everybody all the time, and no matter what their role is, from the court clerk to the prosecutor to the judge, tend to be making their lives harder.
Right. Well, you're making them work is one of the issues. And then, I always laugh about, one of my best days in municipal court, which is, as you know, misdemeanor trials in front of a judge, a bench trial. And I don't even remember the judge's name, but I was in front of a woman judge who was, I'll say, at least defense leaning or defense open to arguments. And I remember I litigated maybe 1 or 2 motions to suppress and one very quick trial. And it wasn't even 12:30 by that time. And she looked at me and said, "We're done for the day."
Right.
She was like, you did enough. You take your wins.
Right.
And we are done. And that is it.
Well, municipal court is truly the factory where cases are just stamped out. That is truly the case. Yeah.
So you came to the public defender's office of Philly after having about 5 years as an attorney?
Yes, that's correct.
And how was your adjustment from the corporate world to learning to handle the volume? As you know, you could have a list of 70 cases. You might split it with somebody, but you start handling preliminary hearings and probable cause hearings. How was that adjustment of going from, what seems to be a completely different world?
Right. There was a period of adjustment in terms of figuring out how to manage the work and how to cope with things. But for me, it was like a huge. It was like a. To me, it was like a great burden was lifted, because normally I'm keeping track of my time. You're billing hours. You're answering. You're being scrutinized for, all sorts of, every little detail of your work is being scrutinized. When you go to a public defender's office, nobody has time for that. You're doing triage. You're dealing with lots of crisis, and there was an enormous autonomy. There's a great deal of autonomy, and which was like freeing to me. It was I was immediately a much happier lawyer when I got there. The work itself obviously was a challenge, and it was a challenge to figure out how to manage it. And there was a learning curve, and there were mistakes made, and the things there's a little trial and error process that goes on. But once that you learn that the curve is steep, but you learn you learn a lot of this stuff pretty quickly. And then once you gain some facility with the rules of court and the practices and the culture, it was exciting to me. It was exciting, figuring out the puzzle of a case, figuring out the puzzle of a judge's orientation, and it was. I found it, very thrilling on a day-to-day level.
Yeah. So you learned that it wasn't that you didn't like being a lawyer. You learned you just
correct.
Didn't like that type of law.
Right. There's a lot of cultural components in the sense of professional culture. It was. I learned that I liked to work independently, and I quickly found I could trust myself to do the work. And once that happened, and I learned my way around, and had and was comfortable with it from a professional culture standpoint, it was really the best place I could think of to work.
So it's funny that you say that you say I learned to work independently. I actually loved that there was so much community in that office of attorneys, and that even the attorneys that started only 6 months ahead of me. So because I was a spring class, there was a fall class that was 6 months ahead of me that were able to also teach me, not just the supervisors, but the people that are 6 months more experience or 1 year more experience. There were just so many resources in that office, and it just seemed like everyone there was there to really help the clients and fight the injustices and fight that, everyone else just wanting to get it processed and done for the day.
Right. I think that's a really good point. I mean, that was the flip side of it, which was the community was also, I'm glad you bring that up. The community, the sort of professional community you have was really phenomenal. I mean, it was the closest. I often described it as like, I don't know, being in college or being on a team being on a team where everyone is supportive of one another, but in a professional environment, in a job. I mean, I think it's hard to find other institutions or other professions where there's anything close to that. I mean, that, some of the friendships you make, in the defender office, the friendships you make and the shared experience, is like for a lifetime. And I agree with you. I mean, there's very little to compare to that. I completely agree.
Right.
Thank you for listening in. Stay tuned for the next part in this conversation. Mighty Merp is available on iTunes, Spotify, and all your favorite apps and players. But the best way to experience the show is to visit mightymerp.com. That's mightymerp.com.